education at a glance. OECD Secretary-General Mathias Cormann will present the report's key findings, and then Andreas Schleicher, who is the OECD Director for Education and Skills, will go into some more details before handing over to Italy's Minister for Education and Merit, Giuseppe Valditara. And just 2 points of housekeeping. There is interpretation in French available both on OECD TV and for journalists following on the Zoom. And I'd like to remind the journalists they can ask questions in the chat function of Zoom, and then we will ask them after the presentations. Thank you. Without further ado, Secretary General.
Thank you very much, dear Minister Giuseppe Valditara, distinguished guests, colleagues, friends all. A very warm welcome to this launch of the 2025 edition of Education at a Glance. Since 1992, this publication has provided comparable, actionable evidence to support education reforms covering enrolment, attainment, and labour market outcomes. This edition, this 2025 edition, focuses on tertiary education, a key driver of growth, innovation, and societal well-being. We need quality, effective tertiary education systems to develop productivity-enhancing skills and foster research, development, and innovation, to prepare health and care professionals for our aging societies, and to train engineers, data scientists, and AI specialists to grow the adoption of new digital and renewable energy technologies, to name just a few. There are, of course, many other very important areas of tertiary education. Educational attainment is at an all-time high, with 48% of young adults across OECD countries now completing tertiary education, which is up very significantly from comparatively low 27% back in the year 2000. In particular, Ireland and Norway have achieved remarkable progress, increasing tertiary attainment by around 10 percentage points in the 5 years between 2019 and 2024. Colombia, Costa Rica, Greece, Italy, Mexico, Portugal, Spain, and Turkey have also made very significant progress, reducing the share of young adults without an upper secondary qualification by between 5 and 13 percentage points. But despite overall growth in tertiary attainment, family background continues to strongly influence enrolment in higher education. In 2012, just 23% of young adults whose parents had not completed upper secondary education attained a tertiary degree, compared to 65% of those with at least one tertiary educated parent. The gap persisted through to 2023, with just 26% from less educated families completing tertiary education versus 70% from highly educated households. To fully harness the potential of tertiary education, we must promote equality of opportunity and indeed merit-based access to tertiary education to tap into all available talent. Low rates of completion among those who do enroll in tertiary education also undermines the return on public investment, deepening skills shortages and limiting access to opportunities. Across 32 OECD countries and partner countries, only 43% of students in bachelor's programs graduate on time, increasing to just 70% within 3 additional years. Men are less likely to complete within this time frame, 63% compared to 75% of women. Low completion rates are often rooted in a mismatch between students' expectations and program content, inadequate academic preparation, and insufficient support systems along the way. Another challenge is that obtaining a tertiary qualification does not always translate into better skills. Across the 29 OECD countries and economies covered in the OECD survey of adult skills, 13% of tertiary educated adults failed to reach even the baseline literacy proficiency level in 2023, meaning that they could understand only short texts on familiar topics. Significant skill gaps persist across countries. For instance, 2,534 25 to 34-year-olds, I should say, 25 to 34-year-olds in Finland with upper secondary education outperform tertiary educated peers in many OECD countries. In today's digital and knowledge-intensive economy, aligning education with labour market needs will be key, as persistent skills mismatches impose real costs on wages and productivity and impact individual well-being. In 2023, around 1 in 3 workers across OECD countries reported being in jobs that do not match their qualifications, skills, or field of study. Overqualified workers earn 12% less than those in well-matched jobs and are less likely to report high life satisfaction. This misalignment is also affecting employers, with nearly 40% of firms reporting skills shortages, especially when it comes to technical skills. And skills mismatches are already slowing the uptake of new technologies in firms. These findings show where the opportunities are to improve education system performance at all levels, to expand access to high-quality tertiary education, and to develop alternative education and skills pathways. First, by upholding rigorous quality standards in tertiary education institutions as we expand access. This includes implementing robust internal quality assurance systems which support high-quality, relevant content and which allow student assessments against agreed outcomes. Quality assurance also means monitoring how graduates fare in their subsequent academic and professional careers and using insights gained to improve the quality and relevance of provision. Independent bodies have a key role to play in this by helping to establish common quality standards and conducting reviews of providers and programs. By way of example, Norway's Agency for Quality Assurance in Education is legally mandated to monitor compliance with statutory requirements and to conduct targeted development work to enhance quality in higher education. Quality assurance systems can also use standards, outcome indicators, and funding incentives to improve the labour market relevance of education and training. Denmark's Council for Basic Education, for example, monitors labour market trends and coordinates the introduction of new programs with employers and social partners. Second, by ensuring that schools fully prepare students for further education, training, and lifelong learning opportunities. Data from our last PISA assessment revealed an unprecedented drop in performance in core cognitive skills across OECD countries, highlighting the need for schools to better equip all students with the critical skills needed for the future. Education systems also need to strengthen career guidance and support students in unique circumstances to continue their studies. For example, data from our 2022 PISA assessments show that 34% of 15-year-old students do not feel well informed about possible pathways after compulsory education. The Korean secondary schools take an innovative approach to addressing this challenge by offering a free learning semester with no exams. Students can use this semester to explore careers through hands-on projects and real-world experiences. Third, expanding and strengthening alternative pathways for skills development, including high-quality vocational education and training, as well as flexible skills certification and recognition mechanisms, such as micro-credentials. This will be an important part of addressing skills shortages into the future and to expanding access to training for individuals who may not have the time or the resources for a full tertiary degree. The OECD is developing a new assessment of vocational education and training to provide evidence-based insights on how to improve the relevance, quality, and effectiveness of these programs. A shift towards lifelong learning through short courses and micro-credentials will also help workers adapt to evolving labour market needs, including navigating the impact of increased AI adoption. However, unless these courses and credentials are high quality, fit for purpose, and fit into recognized pathways, they risk becoming a compliance tick box rather than supporting real tangible progress. One strategy is to provide formal recognition for quality micro-credentials and embed them into national qualification frameworks. New Zealand, for example, has a system that allows short courses to count towards larger credentials. So a one-week course can become a stepping stone towards a more comprehensive qualification. The OECD will continue to support policymakers with comparative data, evidence, and policy analysis to help address these challenges and pursue these opportunities, and to ensure high quality, accessible tertiary education systems. Next month, we will publish new comparative analysis on the financial sustainability of universities and the role of public policy in that regard. And next year, we will release new comparative analysis on opportunities to widen access and boost student success in tertiary education. And in April next year, we will be hosting the 2026 OECD Skills Summit in Istanbul, where ministers will discuss how demographic change, labor migration, and the green and digital transformations of our economies are reshaping skills needs in the economy and what this means for education and training at all life stages. So in closing, high-quality tertiary systems are powerful engines of generating individual opportunity and broader economic growth, innovation, and well-being. To ensure they reach their full potential, governments will need to ensure effective quality control systems, prepare secondary students better for tertiary opportunities, and further develop alternative pathways for skills development. The OECD will continue to be your partner in this by providing evidence-based recommendations to support policymakers in this journey. And with that, I now turn the floor to my friend and colleague, Andreas Schleicher, to present the more detailed findings.
Yes, thank you so much, Mathias. And I will just show some of the data underlying your remarks. And as you mentioned, the first thing that strikes you when you open this year's edition of Education at a Glance is how much a good education really pays. You know, getting a bachelor's degree at 39% of the salary you get with a high school degree, a master's degree at 83% on average. And on the left side of the chart, you see countries where it helps you earn 3 or 4 times as much as a high school graduate. And that has driven rising participation. Since the year 2000, tertiary attainment has grown by about 1 percentage point every year under 21, and then by 0.3 percentage points since then. So that is very significant. Now, there's been a lot of debate on whether this is meaningful to get more and more people to go to college. Some fear that, one day we may all have a college degree and work for the minimum wage. In other words, that rising levels of attainment could lead to diminishing returns. But when you look at the data, there are no signs of that yet. As the red line shows you here, the earnings advantage of young tertiary graduates has actually remained fairly stable. Of course, it's always a matter of what you study. In many countries, pursuing a STEM degree pays a lot more than studying the arts and humanities, but not everywhere. Look at Austria or Slovenia, where studies in health and welfare are now getting the highest premium, and business and health are somewhere in the middle of that picture. At the other end of the spectrum, you see that young people without a upper secondary qualification have really a high risk of dropout, dropping out of the labor force. In Ireland, that risk rises to over 50%. It's not a lot of people in Ireland, but those people are at a very high risk of not getting into the labor force. So there's always debate on how individuals and taxpayers should share the benefits and the costs of advanced qualifications, and education is expensive, and higher education is particularly expensive. You can see that marked here by the red dot, and you can say, for example, Switzerland or Norway spend over $25,000 per student every year. And some countries ask students, those who benefit later on in their lives with better wages, to pay for that. You can see Lithuania, England, or the United States, where students need to pay very high levels of tuition. In countries on the right side, it's taxpayers who are footing the bill. And what's interesting, even after discounting tuition and after discounting foregone earnings while you study, the lifetime financial returns tend to be very high. You look at the United States, this is very expensive universities, but you look at a woman and the increased earnings that are associated with your studies amounts to over $500,000 on average over your working life. So it does pay for people, and tuition is often not the most important barriers. Tuition is particularly high for international students, and yet we are seeing an continued increase, one should say, in international student mobility. You know, when you compare the figures over the last decade here, you can see countries like Australia, the UK, Canada. They've always been attractive destinations for international students, but they have seen particularly large increases over the last decade, and often despite high levels of tuition. So that's the positive news. The troubling part, as Secretary General Cormann has mentioned, it is so important that it's the most talented and the most motivated that get the best places, not the wealthiest. And we still see that, you know, if you have a parent with a college degree, in most countries you have something like a 70% chance of getting a college degree yourself. As you can see here, there's not actually that much variation across countries. But if your parents don't have a college degree, your chances drop dramatically. You can see that here by the blue bar. If you look to Denmark and Korea, you still have a 40% chance to get a tertiary degree if your parents didn't complete high school. No. But in Hungary, Lithuania, the Slovak Republic, that chance drops below 7%. So the chance for youth with tertiary educated parents in these countries is about 10 times as high. What you can also see, and I think that's interesting, that tuition is not always the barrier to this. You can see England, for example, is a system that is quite equitable in relative terms on the left side of the chart here, and still charges high levels of tuition. They have a very good system of, you know, income contingent loans, means tested grants that backs up students. In a way, you can say sometimes you get more equitable outcomes with such tuition systems than without. Because if there is no tuition and public money is insufficient, then often the limited places go again to the students with the best starting conditions. So it's an interesting point. It's not so much financial barriers. It's a lot to do also with student support systems and other kind of factors. Add to this that many young people who begin their studies do not complete their degree. Look at the right side where in, you know, Austria, Colombia, and Chile, and Peru, it's just between 10 and 20% of students who complete their studies in time. Even if you add, you know, 3 years after your expected completion, you can see here, that's marked here by this blue dot. There's still a lot of countries with relatively low completion. There is a lot to do. Countries can do to make studies more efficient, make sure that students complete their degrees on time. And you can see, you know, Ireland, the UK, and Turkey are actually quite good in that. You know, people do start and do complete in time. The Secretary General Cormann has already highlighted skills and qualifications are not the same. You know, when we measured the literacy skills of people directly, we found that university graduates typically have higher skills than people with high school degrees. That's what you expect. But when you look at this across countries, you can see, as our Secretary General has mentioned, a Finnish high school graduate does better on the literacy assessment than a college graduate on average across many OECD countries. What is even more concerning is that large shares of adults who have spent years in education and sometimes even university do not even have the literacy skills of a 10-year-old child. There are countries where the share of, you know, very low skilled is even larger than the share of adults with moderate or high skills. It's also worrying that in many countries, skill levels of adults with a high school degree have dropped over the last decade. So if you didn't complete school, you're now worse off than you were a decade ago. We all hope that, you know, lifelong learning is going to help us catch up and upskilling and reskilling. But, you know, the data are quite sobering on this. You can see, for example, older people participate much less than younger ones in upskilling and reskilling. Those who need it most get the least. You can see the well-educated. They go to upskilling and reskilling, The poorly educated do not. You want to get the unemployment back into jobs, but they are not engaging as much in upskilling and reskilling as the employed. Finally, let's look at investment. We can see that Norway, the UK, Israel invest more than 6% of their GDP in compulsory education. And if you add early childhood education in Norway, that adds up to more than 8% of national income. In some countries, education is one of the most important items of government expenditure, though often, social protection marked here in yellow dominates the picture. Now, most of our countries spend still more on the present and in a way the past than on their future, but it varies a lot. You look at Switzerland on the left side and Italy on the other. There's quite a difference. Now, spending can also vary a lot by region. Now, look at the United States, where Washington spends more than 3 times per student than Idaho. So that's also an important facet of this. And then, what is striking is that compared with other sectors, education invests very little into its future. That's something that we looked for at the first time. How much do countries invest in innovation, in R&D publicly? When you look at this, compare that the health sector, marked here in light blue, invests over 4 times as much in R&D than education. And that's just public money. Just think how much private money the pharmaceutical and biotech sectors invest in medical R&D, which we don't account for in this chart. So I think that's something that we should keep in mind, getting the balance right between the operational expenditure in education today and that investment in the future. We see also that countries spend their money very differently. Now, this chart shows you the student staff ratio on the vertical axis. That's a measure of resources. On the horizontal axis, you see the size of classes. And you can see, for example, Japan and the US hire a roughly equal number of teachers for every 100 students. You can see that on the vertical axis, but class size in the United States are small. In Japan, they are very large. So why would Japan have larger classes when they have as many teachers per 100 students as the US? And the answer is that the Japanese use the time of teachers much more efficiently. You can see, for example, Japanese teachers have plenty of time for coaching and mentoring and even for social work with students. They can build strong relationships with students even outside the classroom settings. In the United States, teachers are busy teaching 1 hour after the other because their classes are small. We also see pay. The United States ranks last when you look at the competitiveness of pay of teachers. So again, the smaller classes in the United States have left less money to pay teachers well. And, when you look at our data in sum, if you have to make a choice between, a smaller class and a better teacher, most high-performing countries go for the better teachers. That has changed in some countries. You can look at how salaries of experienced teachers in Colombia, in Turkey, in Chile have risen by, around 30% over the last decade. And some countries have also raised the starting salaries to address teacher shortages. So things are changing. And I come back once more to the issue of class size. What you can see here is that a good number of countries were able to pay teachers better because they were adding students to each class. Let's put it all together. Let's conclude by showing you what drives the cost per primary student. And I want to compare 2 countries here. Look at Greece and Korea in the middle of the chart. They are both average spenders in price-adjusted terms. So, they spend as much as the OECD average. But you can see that Korea pays its teachers better than the OECD average. Whereas, in Greece, the teachers receive very low salaries. The blue bar goes down. So 2 countries with the same or roughly the same overall spending spend their money differently. Korea and Greece both save money with relatively short school days. What drives up the cost in Greece is that teachers teach far fewer hours. They are not very well paid, teach fewer hours. And the second factor driving up costs in Greece are very small classes. So who spends their money more effectively? Well, actually, our results show that Korea is one of the world's top performing education systems. So it's not just how much you spend, a lot has to do with, how effectively those spending choices are made. And with that, I will conclude. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andreas. I would now like to hand over to Italy's Minister for Education and Merit, Giuseppe Valditara. Minister.
Good morning, everyone. It is a great honor and a pleasure to participate in this international launch of the OECD report, Education at a Glance 2025. And I thank Secretary General Cormann and Director Schleicher for the invitation. The report offers valuable analysis and guidance to all those involved in education policies and supports our common reflection on the achieved results and the further actions to be implemented for improving educational outcomes and fighting inequalities. First, positive data for Italy show an important decrease of the rate of young adults without upper secondary diploma. In fact, in 2024, there has been a significant reduction of the rate of early school leaving to 9.8%. That allows us to reach the National Recovery and Resilience Plan target that is 10.2%, set by the European Commission 2 years earlier. Furthermore, according to Invalsi surveys, the estimated rate for 2025 is 8.3%. This means that the European Commission's 2030 target of 9% has already been reached well in advance. As also highlighted in the last Invalsi survey, while reducing explicit dropout has now been almost achieved, the most significant challenge today is reducing implicit dropout, that is to say, the lack of adequate competencies. In this context, I strongly believe that the focus must therefore shift from retaining students within the school system to creating meaningful learning pathways that are tailored to meet individual needs. Evaluation data of the initiatives implemented in Italy in the last 2 years, particularly the so-called South Agenda initiative, showed that the Italian approach based on personalized interventions targeted at students' specific weakness and tailored to the different local contexts was really effective in reducing regional disparities and enhancing the overall quality of education. Let me show the slides that you can see. Invalsi data highlighted that the schools involved in the initiative have experienced a notable increase. You can see in Apulia and Campania above all, but not only these regions. The learning improvement has doubled in Apulia and Campania. The learning improvement has doubled. Conversely, schools not involved in the action do not show equally positive and clear results. This confirms that personalized and context actions are crucial for improving learning outcomes and supporting a diverse and complex school population, together with the motivation to achieve upper secondary pathways and beyond. Through the South Agenda initiative, we have provided schools in fragile conditions with a set of support measures to intervene in a coordinated way in the battle against school dropout, which can be summarized in 10 strategic actions, such as promotion of guidance and personalization of learning, innovative and laboratory-based teaching, greater accessible accessibility of schools throughout the day and during periods when lessons are suspended, increase the number of teachers for the whole school, not not little classes, not few people in the classes, but more teachers for the whole school to strengthen students' learning for those with greater educational needs. Teacher training activities, initiatives to actively involve families, above all more fragile families, support to school through monitoring and evaluation actions, activation of extracurricular projects to expand school time, extracurricular activities concerning sport, arts, theater, music, special projects connected to the local context. To support this strategy, 325 million euro were initially invested in favor of approximately 2,000 schools in the southern regions, and then 15 million euro for pilot projects in the most fragile areas to implement socio-educational and psychological support actions, personalized courses, and guidance initiatives. To these resources, we also added 35 million euro in favor of schools with greater fragility for the provision of teaching aids, equipment, goods, and services to create a welcoming, inclusive, safe environment designed to encourage learning and well-being of students and school staff, and counteract school dropouts. The intervention model is adaptable to any number of schools and could serve as an example to other countries. It is based on personalized interventions rather than generalized actions. On the basis of this experience, we have extended the plan to fragile schools in the center and north of Italy through an investment of 220 million euro for the initiative called North Agenda. And this to support education institutions located in remote areas or in complex urban contexts. Also implementing specific actions for students newly arrived in our country, foreign students, who do not possess adequate competencies on the Italian language. Thanks to these positive results, we are about to announce another important investment to strengthen and continue the actions of South Agenda and North Agenda, intervening on the most fragile schools and strengthening basic skills to effectively reduce even implicit dropout. At the same time, we have launched an important reform of technical professional school, the so-called 4+2 years, consisting of 4 years of upper secondary schools and 2 years of ITS academy, tertiary education, which establishes an educational supply chain, a pathway in close connection between upper secondary schools and ITS academies, with the necessary participation of companies. We also enhanced the logic of innovative campus and work-based learning, pursuing the goal of a better connection between schools and business. The experimentation of the technological vocational supply provides the use of teachers from the business and professional sectors and the possibility of implementing first and third level apprenticeship pathways. Furthermore, through the reform, we are also enhancing the internationalization process, encouraging exchanges with schools in other countries and the relation with Italian and foreign companies. In conclusion, the Italian strategy, strongly based on OECD data, is aiming at the implementation of a structural change of the Italian educational system, not only to retain and educate each and all students, but above all to support them in developing their potential and talents for a successful educational and professional career. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. We now have some time for questions. I'd just like to remind journalists they can ask questions using the chat function. We will start one here for Andreas, talking about tertiary education. Do you think the financial return on tertiary education is still compelling enough to justify the investment, especially for students from disadvantaged backgrounds?
Yeah. Considering that the main challenges faced by schools, particularly those in a fragile context, regard the lack of infrastructure and human resources, we made available funds to build innovative learning settings and labs, but also to pay teachers for extracurricular activities. We have allocated national resources and used European structural funds, finalizing them better than in the past. For the South Agenda initiative, we integrated 247 million euro from the European structural funds, 22 million euro from the National Recovery and Resilience Funds, and 56 million euro from the national budget. The North Agenda resources are entirely from European structural funds.
Thank you, Spencer, on this very specific aspect. Actually, one of the most interesting findings is that the large increase in tertiary completion has not led to any reduction in the earnings premium. And in some of the countries with, very high levels, even of tuition, UK, United States, you can still that the earnings benefits are pretty much holding. It may not work out like this forever. There may be a point when you will see a deflation of the labor market value of qualifications, and if you add the marginal student at some point, you may see that, but it's not what we see today. So for the moment, it is a good investment. As you saw in the data, it depends a lot what you study. It's very important choosing the topic that actually leads to good labor market outcomes. And this is an area where probably many countries can do better to give young people better guidance, better understanding of what kind of investments pay the highest returns. That's not always what universities do, but I think countries could do a lot better in providing meaningful guidance to careers. But with that caveat, I think for the moment, it's still one of the best investments that you can make in your future.
Thank you, Andreas. So just continuing on the tertiary education issue, Andreas, a question here about inequality of opportunity, and there hasn't been much success in many countries of dealing with this. What do you think is the best way that countries should approach this issue of tackling inequality of opportunity?
Yes.
Yeah, this is also one of our greatest concerns with this data, and particularly in today's economy, you really need to make sure that it's talent and motivation that drives success. But in this way, I think the Italian example is really quite impressive. Italy has been one of the agenda suit that you heard from Minister Valditara is an example where in a few years you can turn things around. And the financial numbers sounded impressive, but they're actually a relatively small share of overall education spending. And I think that makes me optimistic that we can, change long-standing historical disparities. Now, how, to some extent, it can have to do with, financial barriers in higher education. There are clear examples where this is the case. Look to some countries in South America and so on. But I wouldn't say that's the most significant one. A big barrier is the lack of understanding that young people have for their futures. When we looked at data for 15-year-olds, we see that students from wealthy backgrounds see an amazing future in front of them, even if they're not that talented. They clearly want to go to higher education, whereas students from disadvantaged backgrounds often have a very myopic views on their future. I think there's a lot that school can do to help young people understand their potential, understand their career opportunities, and better integrate the world of work and the world of learning to give more young people. I think so. And then in university itself, the social support system. If you come from a wealthy background, you understand how university works. You have to study on your own. You have to set your own learning goals, put together your own course. If you come from a disadvantaged background, you've been used that someone will tell you step by step what to do. And so I think creating better support systems for students from disadvantaged backgrounds to successfully manage that transition, I think is also very important. You put those three things together, and I think you can achieve a lot.
Thank you, Andreas. We have a question here for Minister Valditara. When in your speech, to paraphrase, you talked about reducing the number of students leaving school early and personalized interventions. What do you think other countries can learn from this initiative?
Yes, I believe that the most important part of the Italian experience concerns the use of the territorial data to detect fragile schools and implement educational strategies based on personalized and appropriate interventions targeted at students' specific weaknesses and tailored to different local contexts. In conclusion, the Italian experiences included the vertical technological vocational supply remind us that schools can enhance the potential and talents of every young person, allowing them to successfully accomplish their education and professional goals. Valuing each individual and placing them at the center of all educational activities promotes their full and harmonious growth and guarantees their dignity, freedom, and independence.
Thank you, Minister. We have one question here for Andreas regarding, again, university and completion rates seem to be a problem, particularly for men. Why do you think that is, and what can be done to tackle it, Andreas?
Yeah, I think there's several factors you need to consider. First of all, I mean, in many areas, women do have stronger skills and maybe more diligence to pursue their studies. And I think this is something that we already see in this at the schooling level. At the same time, also, men often have more opportunities for alternatives. They may start their university degrees, then get a job offer. We see that also that, not all dropout is, failure. In some cases, it's just, universities probably have to become better to give people greater ownership over what they learn and how they learn and where they learn. Systems like micro-credentials where people can, incrementally study rather than going through very long, lumpy degrees might make it easier to improve completion rates overall and particularly for men.
Thank you, Andreas. We have no more questions, so we will close the press conference. Thank you, Andreas. Thank you, Secretary General, and thank you, Minister Valditara.